Now that we are well into fall and winter is quickly approaching, the days are getting shorter and running in daylight is becoming harder. Oisel's premium reflective collection is designed with runner safety in mind. Both highly visible in the dark but subtle in the daytime, thanks to the tonal reflective print that only shines bright when reflecting the light. From tights, shorts, jackets, and tanks to accessories like hats and gloves, with Oisel's reflective collection, you can stay safe and stay seen. It is dark here in Cleveland where I've been running, so I just love Oisel's reflective collection. I'm a big fan of the firecracker tights. The bird pattern is so cute, and they look all over sparkly at night. To check out the firecracker tights and the rest of the reflective collection, go to oisel.com/collection/reflective, or even easier, click the banner link at the top of the Hear Her Sports website at hearhersports.com. Hello, everyone. This is Elizabeth Emery coming to you again from our annual late summer break. This week, while on break, in place of the regular episode, I am happy to share another female athlete podcast, Madam Athlete. Madam Athlete is a career-focused podcast about women working in sports and athletics, created and hosted by sports medicine physician Dr. Giselle Arney. Each week on the podcast, Giselle interviews women working in sports about their career and takes a deep dive into career development topics like building your confidence and graceful self-promotion. What I love about Madam Athlete podcast is that because the conversations are centered around sports and career, the connection between sports and the rest of the life becomes really obvious. Her guests often share about how their time as athletes were a crucial foundation to their success outside of sports. Find the episodes at madamathlete.com and your favorite podcast player. Madam Athlete is on Twitter and Facebook at Madam Athlete and on Instagram at The Madam Athlete. Before I hand over the show to Giselle, I want to remind everyone to take advantage of the discount code from our new sponsor, The Feed. With the code FORWARD15, you will get 15% off pretty much everything in your order. The Feed is a one-stop shop for your sports nutrition needs, offering the brands you know and love. I've gotten products from Scratch Labs, Cliff Bar, Morton, Noon, along with protein powders. There is so much available on the site, so check it out. Go to thefeed.com and use FORWARD15 for 15% off. And a big thank you to The Feed for sponsoring the Female Athlete Podcast Network, Keeping Her Forward, which includes Strides Forward and Keeping Track podcasts, as well as Hear Her Sports. Now I'll let Giselle introduce her guest, long jumper and founder of the Sports Equity Lab, Dr. Yetsa Tuakli. Find the Sports Equity Lab at sportsequitylab.com and on social at Sports Equity Lab.
Welcome to the Madam Athlete Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Giselle Arney. I'm a sports medicine physician with a passion for teaching and a mission to support other women with careers in this space. On this show, you'll hear the stories from amazing women in their field of sport and athletics. They'll share their journeys, triumphs, and hardships in order to help and inspire you in your own career and life. Thanks for joining us. Let's do this. On today's episode, I'm talking to physiatrist and founder of Sports Equity Lab, Dr. Yetsa Tuakli-Wosornu. Yetsa is a sports physiatrist and assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and an adjunct associate professor at Yale School of Public Health. She's the founding director of the Sports Equity Lab, which focuses on dismantling inequalities in sport while amplifying sports' role as an agent for positive change. We talk about how learning to direct your focus to multiple pursuits can add meaning to your work, applying skills learned through sports like how to pivot and adapt to everyday life, and Yetsa's advice to cherish and prioritize unstructured time as a way to create a sustainable, meaningful life. Hi, Yetsa. I'm so excited to talk to you today. I can't wait.
Hello. Yes, I can't wait as well. We started last week.
Yes, this is fantastic. Okay, you have literally done all of the things, and I'm going to attempt to work my way through them, but truly you've done so much. But I always start at the beginning with the educational journey. And I'm curious for you because so you went to Yale for undergrad and you got a bachelor's in African studies, and then you went on to med school at Harvard. And so I was just wondering what your initial career thoughts were. Did you always have med school in mind? Did it kind of come to fruition later? Like what happened there?
I love this question. I didn't expect that one. So I'll take it all the way back. So I was born in London to my amazing mother, who I'm realizing is one of the smartest people literally on the planet. She's from Nigeria, and then dad is from Ghana. And then from London, we moved to Boston because mom literally asked people, where's Harvard? And they said, it's in Boston, Massachusetts. She said, okay, great. That's where we're moving. So
oh my gosh, I love this.
I know. We moved there, me, my twin sister, my mom, and our stepdad with our adorable British accents when we were 3, like asking for a bottle as opposed to bottle, which is how I say it now. And my mom raised us, in the Boston area. And mom's a pediatrician, dad's a surgeon. So we kind of had medicine in our home, kind of like in our upbringing and our background. It sort of seemed like a great opportunity to serve, the community, but at the same time stay really engaged intellectually. Mom really has a lot of fun as a physician. And so when we were in middle or high school, I can't remember which one it was, we were taking piano and violin and all these great, Boston, availing ourselves of all the opportunities in Boston. And mom would drive us by Harvard Medical School and say, well, Yetsa, if you become a physician, if you, abandon your dreams of being a veterinarian, that's the medical school you'll be going to. And I was like, well, I'm definitely going to be a veterinarian, going to stay true to my original roots. Every single time I saw a train of ants crossing the sidewalk, I would make everybody stop so we could let them pass. And then bring all the injured animals in the community into the house to rehabilitate them over like months. And it was really not sanitary or safe, but it was still, that was my passion, rehabilitation and, the lesser of the beings on earth, because they didn't have anyone to defend them. So yeah, I think Harvard Medical School was sort of planned. At least the seed was planted very early. But when we got to Yale, I decided to do African studies because I adore the cultural traditions and ways of knowing and ways of being from home. So the idea of a village raising a child, or polyrhythms in music, and how that polyrhythmic philosophy shows up even in the textiles and in the art and the social structure. I very much gravitated to that. And wanted to study it a little bit more deeply. And so that's why I chose African studies, just because it's a deep interest of mine. And then, I kind of listened to my mom and went to medical school in Boston after that.
I love it. All those secret prompts that she had been like, walking you by for like a couple decades was like,
we would roll by at like 10 miles an hour.
Look, isn't it pretty? Don't you like it?
Look at that marble. Oh my God, it's so nice. It has Harvard etched into the marble. Beautiful, no? I'd be like,
goodness. Okay, that's hysterical. I love her long game sneak attack on you. And it works. And it worked. And you've done really amazing things with it. And what's kind of hysterical when you said that with the vet, I had no idea about that. But you still went into rehabilitation, but this time for humans.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe this is so funny. This is actually, okay, I haven't actually put those things together. Can you imagine after all these years, 42 years of not putting those together? But yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I think that's actually, there's a lot to be said for that, right? So when I was little, I used to really, really, I'm one of those highly sensitive people, I guess. My heart would break if there was, like a deer on the side of the road, or we had a bird named Randy who I tried to rehabilitate, didn't work too well because he was, a wild bird. Trying to make him his broken wing, put it on a popsicle stick, and I put him in my den, and he would fly around frantically, breaking most of the things in the den. Yeah, that didn't work too well. But I really had a bleeding heart for that entire that entire narrative, like injury, and the idea that, well, if there's something that is injured and has sort of been rendered in need of restoration, I really want to assist in that process, both so that thing can, optimize its function, but then also just because I just imagine it's got to be kind of sad and tough and lonely to lose that functionality. So I really had a huge sort of bleeding heart for that narrative. And I guess it did kind of translate into what I'm doing now in physical medicine rehabilitation.
That's so interesting. You also, so you didn't go right there because you took time to get a master's in public health. And I'm curious for you too, right? Because in medicine, there's a billion different things you can do with it. We often think of like one or two, but truly there's a million things you can do. And you sort of early on were interested, or I don't know if you're interested, but you got into this research path, this career scientist. I mean, you had a Fulbright scholar, you were an NIH scientist, and like you've done all of this. Was that early on in med school that the research and that curiosity that you have of sort of figuring things out that played into you kind of pursuing this research path? How did that come about?
That's a really good question. I think I wish it was linear and well planned out, but I don't think it was. I think at the bottom of it all, I've always just had a really strong curiosity just in general. I'm just really curious as to how things work. I used to, when I was 4 or 5, take the phone apart and try to put it back together unsuccessfully. But I had a lot of fun doing that. Or, in track and field, when I got into it, I was like, fascinated by the long jump and the hurdles because of the technical aspects of them. Like how can you create optimal angles to fly basically in the long jump, or going over hurdles. How many steps in between each hurdle to optimize the race pattern? Like I was really interested in how things actually work. So mechanism has always been of interest. I wish I had some grand plan when I got to medical school to enter research, but I didn't. I really just followed the most interesting questions that came up year after year. So my first formal foray into research was basic science. Between my 3rd and 4th year of med school, I did the Stanley Sarnoff Cardiovascular Research Fellowship. I went down to Dallas, Texas, 10-gallon hats and all. And I worked in Helen Hobbs and Jonathan Cohen's lab. They characterize loss and gain of function mutations in genes that work on the cholesterol pathway. And they were mentored by Brown and Goldstein, who discovered the statins. So Brown and Goldstein are down the hall with their literal 10-gallon hats and deep Texan accents, and everything was like mustard yellow and brown. Just very like Dallas sort of 70s Texas. But amazingly, that's like literally where the statins came from. And then Helen Hobbs, who is really a lifelong mentor of mine, she's a clinical endocrinologist who got into cholesterol pathways due to her clinical interests. She's just a larger than life figure and a wonderful mentor who always said, you need to be able to tell a compelling, meaningful story that has impact on people's lives and makes them better. Like that's literally what science is. To ask some questions that truly matter to people's health and well-being, dig into it like you would approach training for the Olympics in terms of your industriousness and work ethic, but at the end of the day, communicate it in a way that people can follow, grabs them, gives them an opportunity to understand what it is that you're doing, why it's important. So she was really my sort of foundational research mentor, because it was my first time taking a full year just to do basic science. And I started at basic science because I wanted to really kind of start at the beginning and understand the way scientists think every day for, 365 days. And so that was one of my favorite years, great experiences. We ended up with an incredible publication in Nature Genetics out of that year. And I think that set me up for just seeking out important questions that have impact, and then taking time to create a method that's going to get you to the answer in a way that means something to other people. That's, I think, the most important thing, rather than just do copycat experiments or easy experiments or something that someone tells you that you should do, et cetera, if that makes sense, Giselle.
Oh my gosh, it makes so much sense. I love that philosophy, and to have learned that first in your research career to go, and like you said, it's not just about an interesting question. It's also a meaningful question, something that will actually have an impact and make a difference and help. And, I know we might be jumping around all over the place, but that's cool. It's fun. You started your own lab, the Sports Equity Lab, and this sort of research is so impactful. It's so meaningful. It's so important. And it's not to say that basic science research itself is not important or impactful. But when you're centering that meaning, the meaningfulness, then just how much more incredible is that work going to be? And, I talk about this in other aspects of the podcast and of my course, but when you have a goal that matters to you, that you truly find meaningful, that is your goal, that you're motivated by, it's intrinsically motivating, you're going to do so much, you're going to work so much harder at it. You're going to have an easier time getting after it. Even when it's not easy, it doesn't mean it's easy, but it's going to be mentally more engaging and easy to get after it than when somebody else just says, oh, just research this. Oh, just look up this. So I love this. I love this.
Yeah, and just to add to that, Giselle, it's none of us is without context, right? I started my conversation about studying African studies because obviously I grew up with my mom, blaring Moroccan music on Sundays and Fela Kuti Monday through Friday. That's a Nigerian artist. And every single get together was multicultural, pluricultural, like very, very, very worldly, global upbringing. And so, yeah, it's important to do research that matters to you, but you yourself are always part of a community of some kind, right? So it's also important to think, who is it that which community do I represent? Which community am I a part of? And how is this beneficial to my community? In my community of athletes, my community of women, my community of West African women, my community, whatever it is, whichever community, is of most meaning to you. Maybe that's just your local community, your city, your school, your class of residence, whatever it is. No individual is devoid of context. And I think in science, obviously we're biomedical scientists. We have huge platforms and huge responsibilities, but also privileges to speak for and do work on behalf of communities that we represent. And I think that's why the work in sports is so meaningful, because many, many things. But I think if you are asking, for example, my mom or my closest family, my Auntie Allison, my Auntie Simi, ask them, like, what is Yetsa at the end of the day? They would say she's just a jock. Like she's this like Tasmanian devil little kid sprinting around, running into things and laughing, really excited about just moving and being like kinetic. And so athletes to me are their family, their home. And so being able to do meaningful work on behalf of the community that I'm part of, yeah, that's intrinsically motivating and in a sustainable way,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. And you talk about this of your context as an athlete, because you competed at an elite level. You represented Ghana national team. You have also, aside from the work at Sports Equity Lab, which that's not really an aside, that's a huge thing that you've done, but you've also been part of International Paralympic Committee. You're their inaugural welfare officer and member of medical committee. You have done so much work in that realm as well of athletes with disabilities. How was that experience for you as an athlete? Like, what is your context as an athlete growing up and competing at this elite level?
I love this question. Again, Giselle, I haven't thought about, thank you for telling me not to prepare.
That's right. It's great. You just see what happens.
Yeah, it's so nice to go down memory lane like that. My context as an athlete. Well, first I'll say my relationship to sport has changed over time. That's for sure. So when we were younger, we sort of, were, back in the day, I think maybe you can relate to this. I think there was this sort of fallacy that you kind of had to choose sports or school. There's this sort of, I'm not sure if you can relate to that or if your listeners can, but there was the idea that, okay, this one is the jock, me, and my twin sister is the nerd. Or, and then a couple of years would go by and I would do better in school. She would do better on the track. Well, now this one is the jock and that one is like, it's just, you sort of had this one dimensional identity that was made available to you. So I think I falsely kind of felt that I had to choose through high school, through college, which one I wanted to spend more time in or on. And what I didn't realize, and what I do realize really clearly now, is how, man, the lessons that you learn in those sports environments, to me, are the most valuable, period. And the content that we learn in some of the higher upper echelon classrooms of the world that many of your listeners are a part of, anyone in biomedical science is a part of, and we're privileged to be part of, can be used in the service of those sports spaces where other persons who may not have our intellectual bandwidth can necessarily access. So the two complement each other. And they really need to be put in conversation with each other as opposed to in competition with each other. So that's been my evolution over time. And that's only because I'm so stubborn that I just continue to compete forever. Like I trained through college and I felt like, I'm doing all these track and field meets and they're great. However, I'm also going to, African dance team practice and step team practice probably 2, 3, 4 days a week as well, and I'm hardly getting any sleep. I wonder if I'm really optimized as a performer. So that was my constant sort of conversation with myself through Yale. Graduated, like I wonder if I could have jumped further if I were better rested or didn't also step and stomp on my legs for the past 3 hours in preparation for the step team, performance. And so I thought, well, maybe I'll continue to train in college in medical school if there's an opportunity. Get to Boston. Actually, before that, I was doing my Fulbright. Even in my Fulbright in Nigeria, I joined the University of Ibadan track team in Nigeria just to keep my fitness up when I was doing my Fulbright. And then I got to medical school in Boston, and I thought, okay, well, if I find an opportunity to continue to train, I will. Lo and behold, 3 blocks away from our medical school, we have the Reggie Lewis Track and Field Center, and there was a track team there, a track club. So I joined the track club there and I kept training and competing, and I noticed that I was getting better in medical school, jumping further, getting closer to sort of national team qualification distances. So one of my friends just said, you should really try to make a national team because, you're jumping further and further every year. And it's not subtle. We're measuring the distances. This is objective. And so then I had it in my mind, okay, maybe I'll try to be an elite competitor, even at, this late stage in the game. So finally, end of medical school, I qualified for the Ghanaian national team as one of the long jumpers, training with their squad over the next couple of years. So I did that through my fellowship, which is, of course, internship, residency, and then fellowship. And I got to compete internationally with that squad, and it was the greatest gift. Such an incredible group of people, all from every corner of the world. Ghanaian national team, most of our competitors, I would say, are outside of Ghana, unlike other national squads. So there's a little bit of a nuance there in our team structure. But of course, everybody is Ghanaian. Some were in the Netherlands, some were in Canada, France, America, of course. And we come together for, all Africa Games or the national champs, Commonwealth Games, events like that.
That's incredible. I love this story as an athlete competing at this elite level, that it was not necessarily you 100 hours a day only doing this from a young age, peak early, and then you're done, right? Like that it grew and built with you, and it grew with your curiosity and your interest. And I think that's such a more sustainable method for prolonging your athletic career.
Yeah, I think you should always have a healthy relationship with sport. I think healthy relationships, generally speaking, are a good thing. Healthy and balanced.
Yes.
Whether it's with your spouse or your friends or your mentors or mentees or sports. Or yourself. And I think, when we were younger, we used to get so confused. We genuinely thought you had to have this sort of, maniacal, zero-sum, intense sort of relationship that was exclusive to your sport and your training environment, which, doesn't allow for full humanity. It doesn't allow for you to be a full person, a kid, curious about other things. And so, there's anything that's imbalanced, I think, is not very healthy. So yeah, it did slowly evolve over time, and I stayed super curious about what else was possible. When I was doing my master's in public health, this is when I kind of became a little bit more serious about training after medical school. I met a really good friend of mine, Tiambe Hurd. She's the American record holder in the women's triple jump. She just so happened to be in Maryland. I was in Maryland. And one of my coaches just said, Tiambe Hurd is about 45 minutes away. And if she knows anything, she knows for sure how to create elite horizontal jump performances. She's done it. She's current American record holder. She's an Olympian. She's not much, taller than you. She was about 3 inches taller than me. And she's a lovely person. You should reach out to her and see if she can be your training partner, or she would have you as a training partner. So I did. And that, I have to tell you, Giselle, that first session we had with her, it was a weight session. I just went there, my little gangly self. I've always been a little skinny, underweight for an elite jumper, to be honest. And I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I trained through college. I've qualified for a national squad. I know how to lift weights. I know how to clean squat. I know how to snatch, etc. This lady put me through this session. After 20 minutes, I was like, wait, are you sure I need to lift this much? She just started laughing. She's like, what? She's like, what are your goals? And I was like, well, I want to be on my national team. I want to break the national record. I want to be an Olympian if I can one day. That would be great. And she was like, well, these are the ingredients that are required to achieve this outcome. You have to assess your outcome, your strategies by your outcome. You haven't achieved any of those goals yet. So your strategy is incorrect. It's not working. It's not idealized or optimized for your outcome. And I was like, I guess you're right. I will admit that you have achieved the outcomes that I'm discussing. She completely turned my entire world around, like flipped the apple cart and said, nope, go back to the drawing board. None of this is right. So I just learned almost from the beginning how to lift, what to lift, when to lift, how to eat and supplement my track workouts with that lifting program. My body totally changed in about 3 months. All my performances got better after about 12. Took a while. I definitely got worse before I got better. But no, she just said, this is unacceptable. And if your goal is to remain at this level, by all means, continue to do what you're doing and live where you're comfortable. Continue to lift, 1.5 times your body weight, 1.8 times your body weight instead of 3, Yeah. I was like, oh, appreciate it. So she became a good friend, and that just totally shifted the approach I took to training. But I think you have to have that ability, right? The ability to pivot, and adapt, and just take that humble stance. Nope, definitely can't be right because I haven't achieved what I want to. So how can I learn from others and change if I need to?
There is just so much to take away from this, because starting off with that goal in mind, and what is your mission? What is your vision? What are you trying to get after? And then back yourself up from there and go, okay, well, what are the steps that are going to get me there? Like truly thinking, like you said, flip that apple cart. Like, what is it that your goal is? And now back your way into that and figure that out and be willing to go, okay, yeah, I've been working really hard. Is it going to make a difference? And this is just like sidestepping into career stuff. A lot of times we just buckle down and work harder, right? Like we just got to grind it out. Like, oh, okay, we'll just do this same thing we've been doing and just do it more or do it harder. And that is not always that's just going to keep giving you that same result that you have had, but maybe like a little burned out. And so going, maybe do I need an entire different plan or a different approach and be open to something new? Like, that's incredible.
Yeah, that expression, always be closing.
Mm-hmm.
Like always be learning, right? So like, yes. I think, we're all very talented, right? We know that we've passed many a test, but there's so much we can learn, wisdom, like deep wisdom from people around us, especially when their outcomes are similar to those that we want. So I think being able to, not have like almost this false humility, like, out of obligation, I'm going to go sit with this person and try to learn from them and poach ideas and appropriate them into my system. No, it's like maybe I need to hear that the system needs to be revamped and restructured. There's a different level of humility there, but there's also a different level of hunger there. Like I really wanted to make it to my national squad. Like I was like, I'm not playing around on this one. So those two things in combination, I think, are a pretty good strategy.
Yes. Okay, I wanted to ask, because I'm curious, how did you become involved with the International Paralympic Committee and start doing work there? Because I know you've also, within PM&R, working with athletes with disabilities is a track that a lot of folks go into within sports medicine. And well, not a lot, probably we could use more, but you've also chaired a task force on physical activity for persons with disabilities within the International Society for Physical and Rehabilitation Medicine. And so I know you've done a lot of work in this area, and I was wondering kind of how did that come about and how did you become involved with Paralympics?
Yeah, it's a good question. It started with a personal connection. So in 2011, I was called up to compete at the All Africa Games in Mozambique, in Maputo, Mozambique. And I was so excited, my first international competition. I didn't realize it at the time, but the All Africa Games is kind of like the Commonwealth Games in that it's totally inclusive. So you have athletes with and without disabilities in the same games village, training and competing at the same event. So unlike, doing the Olympic Games, you've got the Olympics that occur, and then a couple of weeks later, the Paralympics take place. So that's actually not inclusive. They're two separate carnivals. Whereas the All Africa Games, 100% inclusive. I didn't know that. So I showed up, and all I knew is that, I would like to get a medal. I'd like to jump a little further than I have been doing. But more importantly, I want to take in this experience of being here with my little, my athlete credentials. I was so proud. Little did I know that Maputo was just like one of the most, as All Africa Games go, it was one of the least well-funded. So you're like fighting for roles in the cafeteria. They'd be like, you can only have one. Like, what? And my teammates were like, when we were in Nigeria a couple years ago, we had like a spread. It was like huge buffets. Anyway, so I didn't realize it was like the poor man's version of an international sports carnival. But I was excited. So we were in the line, in the cafeteria line, waiting for our ration roll. And my friend Seydou, he's a beach volleyball player for Ghana, just said, hey, have you met Raphael? And I said, no, who's that? And he asked me to turn around. I looked up, I looked around, didn't see anybody. He said, look down, he's sitting down. I said, oh, I looked down. It was Raphael. He was sitting in his chair. So Raphael is the only Ghanaian who is qualified for 5, either Olympic or Paralympic Games successively. So that's a 25-year stretch.
Jeez.
I mean, yeah, it's not a short period of time. So Raphael is our most successful athlete, period. And a 20-year stretch. Let me not act like I don't know how to do math, but because these games were delayed, it ends up being about 21. And so he's our most successful athlete, but I never heard of him. So over the course of those games, I just got to know him really well as a friend. We were there for about 12 days or so. And I noticed that the terms on which he was present representing Ghana were drastically different from the terms on which I was there representing Ghana. So able-bodied athletes, we were given apartments to ourselves. So we had in the Games Village, we had these apartment blocks for the different countries. Ghana had a little block, Angola had a little block, et cetera, et cetera. Our block was all horizontal jumpers, sprinters, and a few distance folks sprinkled in, but it was maybe 1 or 2 to an apartment. One evening, Raphael asked me to come visit his block, and I went to his apartment, and there were 13 para-athletes on mattresses on the ground. Yep, adjoined together loosely and totally haphazardly, all of their racing chairs, with which they were winning gold and silver medals for Ghana, were stacked in the kitchen like surplus storage. and they had no access to the kitchen. They couldn't use it. I was mortified. I mean, the phrase 3/5 a human really came to mind, like immediately.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at this very stark and clear atrocity, a total dehumanization of elite competitors with whom I share a jersey at the same games. Yeah. And I was like, okay, so yeah, I was curious about this whole inequity thing, how it showed up related to disability stigma and the intersectionality of being West African, a person with a disability, an elite athlete who is depending on that medal and that per diem to support one's family when one gets home. Mm-hmm. I just thought, no, this is too much. So that personal connection really prompted my interest in actively trying to fill in those gaps, but more importantly, bringing those stories to light, because no one's going to speak for that group. If someone like you or me or, persons who are have any kind of platform to say, hey, there's some science here, or hey, there are a few, policies to be changed here, whatever it is, those stories are going to literally just go silent and untold if they're not actively brought to the forefront. So it just started with a personal connection. And so when I got back from Mozambique, by the way, while Raphael won multiple gold medals, while Adjira, one of my good friends, Mohammed, won, I think, like 8 gold medals. I know, everything from the 100 meters to the marathon.
Oh my gosh.
I know. I got 6th place and I was so excited. In one event, the long jump. When I got back, I just started to really intensively investigate how I could get engaged in the medical committee. Mm-hmm. One of my colleagues, Wayne Derman, actually happened to mention to me that there was an opening in the IPC medical committee. And so I went through my National Paralympic Committee and I, very efficiently, again, with that same hunger, applied. And then they accepted me onto the medical committee. But it started with a personal connection. I couldn't stand to see my teammates in that condition. I just thought if there's nothing else we can do in sport, but try to make it truly safe and fair and equitable for the competitors in sport, then, we might as well do that, because that's the basic. That's literally step one.
Yeah. Oh my God. Was this one of the drivers behind starting the Sports Equity Lab? Yes, it was. Yeah, it was 100%. I could just see that there was a need for athletes' vulnerabilities to be made more public, but also taken seriously as its own science. Mm-hmm. So that could be positively impacted. Yeah, and I love that this has taken your personal experience as an athlete, your experience seeing this firsthand among your teammates and seeing what happens, but your experience as a physician, as a physiatrist, as someone who has this interest in the rehabilitation and taking care of a whole athlete, right? And a whole person and helping them perform at their best. It's like added all of these things that you have done or experienced or learned along the way and has wrapped it up into this beautiful thing that is doing this incredible work to help dismantle inequities in sport. So talk to me about the Sports Equity Lab. What do you do there? And how, I'm also curious, because for folks who don't know, right, she's running her own lab, but you also are working as a physician. You ran this through COVID, right? You switched jobs through this. How are you keeping this up and supporting it and just doing all the things? Because you're still publishing, you're just doing incredible things. How does this all happen? What are the secrets? Yeah. How does it all happen? Let's see. Well, it starts with the personal connection, right? That's the most important, I think. Let's see. What do we do? So obviously the mandate is to study healthy and unhealthy relationships in sport, but also try to dismantle inequities, like you mentioned. And inequities it's kind of an abstract concept, but really anything that leads to a fixed power imbalance between a group that is disadvantaged and another group that is advantaged. So inequity can exist along lines of gender. It can exist along lines of ability versus disability, personal capacity. It can exist along lines of socioeconomic status.
So anything that sort of there's like a little guy and there's a big guy. The little guy is who we care about, and we're interested in fighting for, learning more about their experience so that they can no longer be disadvantaged by structural imbalances. So that's the goal, dismantle some of the inequities in sports. What we do is try to take a truly interdisciplinary approach to various research projects and questions. So on the research side, I like to lean into qualitative methodology quite a bit to ask questions like, what is the experience of interpersonal violence or abuse or disability stigma for athletes who have disabilities who live in a context like West Africa, right? That's how it all started. So we might do like a qualitative study interviewing athletes from Ghana as a starting point. We recently added India and Brazil, and we'll ask them just out of, in your own words, at your own pace, what is your experience of harmful behaviors in sport? 1, 2, 3, go. We have a qualitative expert who works with us, Sakina Sudaratana. We're really blessed to have her on our squad. And she does a beautiful job of quantifying qualitative data, which is basically very, very long transcripts. And then we put that in scientific packaging and put it out into the world, hopefully adding new insights that, again, may not have been made present had we not gone looking for them. So that's one method that we try to use, qualitative methodology, to answer questions that mean something to athletes. Another thing that we do is lean into the quantitative work. So global balance and global representation and global perspective is really important to me. And so I try to, if we're going to do a survey, like the Athletes' Rights Survey, for example, we try to poll athletes broadly. So that survey, we ask the question, do athletes know and truly have confidence in their human rights in the sports context? So that is while you're training and competing, right? While you're going to practice, while you're lifting your weights, while you're complaining about the next repeat mile you have to do with your teammates, while you are doing your 500th sit-up for, the day, do you truly feel like, I have freedom of speech right now? Or do you really feel like if my rights were violated, I could freely seek redress without fear of consequence? You know what I mean? Like, do those things actually mean something to you in sport? We suspected that the answer was probably no, because when we thought back on our experience as athletes. And so we did that survey. I think we had 70 countries involved in that survey. And the way that happened is, again, great network of friends and colleagues who care about the work. We just brought together a research team and we all polled our networks, and that successfully got to that many athletes in that many countries. So that's like a quantitative, right, method that we're using to ask a question that we think matters to athletes and matters to sports. And then, of course, there's mixed methods where you can take a qualitative and a quantitative approach in the same study and ask a question that you think is important to the topic of inequity in sport. So that's kind of what we do. Who we are is this amazing group of generational and interdisciplinary, mostly ex-athletes who now do other things like medicine or law or public health or human rights. So I have faculty who have just organically kind of joined the group really over the past couple of years. In Australia, human rights department in New Haven. I started everything at Yale, so a lot of my colleagues are in New Haven in the public health faculty or in orthopedics. I got a surgeon who works with us. And then at University of Bath, we have a qualitative expert working with us there. So it really is a very organic, interdisciplinary, multi-generational group that came together just solely based on interest. We sort of started working with 4 students at Yale because they're students, they just know how to work social media, and started to put the word out more and more. We recruited more students. And then ultimately my colleagues and friends from around various conferences and also the sports community started to gravitate towards the group. And now we just have this like organic, decentralized squad that does really interesting work because we think it's important. Like that's genuinely it.
It's really an interesting group of people that that is global, which is your interest, that is interdisciplinary, which is your interest, that has that athlete context, which is your interest. It's like it's organic, but it's also, it feels like meant to be. Feels like that all came together beautifully to do this work.
Can I say the one thing that I will say though?
Yes.
The thing is, every single person at the end of the day in the group is an athlete and has huge empathy for the athlete experience. I think that really matters.
Yeah.
I think it matters because you get all these insights that are really obvious to those who have walked the walk. Because you've done it. You can look back on your training days and say, no, that policy wouldn't really work, for me in my gym in Maryland with Tiambe, for example, right? I can think about it. I can put myself in the shoes of somebody training in the environment and say it would or wouldn't work for an athlete in track and field. We have a football player. He's a current college football player at the school that will remain unnamed because we're at Yale. He's at Harvard.
Come on, you did both. You crossed the lines.
No, where you did your college and no. College is where you really have your loyalties. So Yale Bulldogs.
Okay, med school doesn't count.
No. All day Yale Bulldogs. So, but so yeah, he's a Harvard football player. But his insights are so interesting because he had hundreds of people on their team, and that sort of group think, that sort of next man up mentality. It's really alive and well. Some toxic masculinity comes into play. So his insights are so fascinating and add so much value to our conversations and to our studies. And then you have our silver medalist Olympic swimmer, Allison. She currently works for the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. Silver medalist for the U.S. in swimming, individual sport, but it's a water sport, right? So I have no idea what it is to put on a bathing suit every single day for practice. That just sounds strange. Yeah, so she brings insights from swimming. And then now she also works in anti-doping. She's got great insight from there. So it's like you have all these perspectives. And to me, it's invaluable. You literally can't put an amount on that. It's invaluable, but it's also necessary because that diversity of perspective, not of personal background or of ethnicity, but of perspective, is where really unique and piercing ideas and insights come from. And that's been the real, it's just been the real joy of the group. Every conversation is some out of the box, left field comment from some perspective and experience that none of us really know have anything to do with. We're just like, what college football guy? Or, one of our athletes he was a former professional soccer player for a U.S. team. And that's a different world altogether. So, yeah, it's the diversity of perspectives that makes it so rich and wonderful.
That's awesome. And how do you keep up with it? Because, it's kind of like your side gig, or how do you manage that while also working as a physician clinically?
Yeah, good question, Giselle. Well, that's part of why I moved. I realized that I couldn't work as a clinician 4 or 5 days a week and give the appropriate attention and respect to this group. So I changed my job structurally such that I am able to see patients 2 to 3 days per week as opposed to 5. And then I have dedicated research and writing time and thinking time for some of the projects that we're advancing in sports related topics. So that structural change was really required for me. I know what you're saying. I noticed that I was getting really burnt out and tired, energized, but exhausted.
Right. I love that. And I think it's something that a lot of people struggle to go, wait, I could do this less than full time. Like, I don't have to do this 5 days a week. Like, no, you don't have to. Right. But it's where you're ingrained to go, this is what it means to be a physician, like 5 days a week for whatever. So I love that you did that and realized that and created a structure for you that allows you to keep your clinical practice and to also give the time dedicated to this incredible sports equity lab that you've built. So I just think that's super incredible. And I love that. So some of the questions that I ask everyone
Mhm.
are, what particular challenges have you faced in your career? What things have been difficult for you that you've had to overcome or that you still struggle with today?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about last week, Giselle, about showing up in this really power-driven, kind of top-down hierarchical system and resisting the temptation to just regress to that way of doing things, right? And I think it's an ongoing struggle. Like it's an ongoing struggle to show up as myself, and to really see value in my perspective, see value even in the way that I interact with other people. So I think that in academic medical settings, especially here in the States, I'm not sure if it's the same in the rest of North America, but I know for sure in the States, it's pretty competitive. And I think there's a very specific persona that gets rewarded. And it's really easy to start to think that there's more value to kind of that entering a room and entering a team with a, you know, bravado, for lack of a better word, and interacting with people in a way that shows that you really are adherent to power imbalances, basically. And so I think understanding that no, there's other ways that you could do things. You can show up as more yourself in a way that's just more collaborative, maybe a little bit less um, um, less imposing, and still succeed, and it still has value. So I think resisting the urge to just regress to that way of doing things has been a struggle. But what's given me a lot of hope and sort of encouragement is seeing mentors around me do that and succeed, or even peer mentors around me do that and succeed. And so it gives me an opportunity to say, like, look, it's possible. It's just that the entire system is not necessarily rigged in a way that it's celebrated. You just have to know that you know that you know that your way of doing it is okay.
Yes. We had such a good talk. That could have been an entire other podcast episode about this. I know, but it's such a tricky thing, right? When the field of, in our case, medicine, right, was designed in the United States, again, like we can get a little more granular about this, but it was a white male field. It was a white patriarchal society situation. It was not set up to include others. It was set up very hierarchical, very like the person with the most confidence and the most bravado, and not actually the most confidence, but looks like the most cockiness, maybe, like that outward expression. Like they're who succeed, but that's not who necessarily provides the best care or has the best outcomes. And there are so many other different ways to show up and to be an amazing physician and to have incredible value and to really contribute. And it's hard when the entire system is set up in such a way to really go, do I fit here? Like, how do I fit here? And how can I show up as myself and not be overtaken by this other way of being? And it, I mean, I just feel you. This is a huge thing. And I think it's even incredible to be able to recognize that you're seeing that and that that's what's happening. And to go, I have to internally know for myself. So that's beautiful. It's not easy.
Yeah, I think the pandemic has helped with that. It's kind of given people a sense of renewal. And it's given people an opportunity, I think, en masse in every sector, not just medicine, to start reevaluating, right? Their priorities and how they want to be and how they want to show up to their jobs, to themselves, to their families, all of it. And I think that we've, as a whole, a world, we've done a really good job of kind of stepping back and reevaluating, then reentering maybe a little bit differently. I think the other thing is, though, in academic medicine, I'm not going to lie, fatigue is a big challenge. It's higher all the time. And I think that part of that is just because of the demands of the emotional labor of taking care of other humans. You have true empathy and you show up for them with authenticity, then you really do. As an introvert, I definitely get drained.
Yes.
From doing that, but I want to do it the right way at the same time. So just balancing that and kind of literally having these micro conversations with myself all the time that, nope, show up, right? I know you're tired, but try to do it, do your best, do your best, do your best. That is, it's been a challenge, but it's also been, a good opportunity to rehearse that, sort of almost like coaching myself during the day.
Yeah.
Despite fatigue. Yep, I see you're fatigued. I understand. You will get rest soon, but in this moment, try to show up for this person in the way that you want.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so what particular triumphs have you had in your career? What things are you really proud of?
Triumphs? Oh gosh. I'm very proud of my lab. I really am. They're a beautiful group of people. I'm proud of the way I've been able to connect with my patients. I got a note from one of my patients just yesterday, actually, and she said, in my 84 years living on this earth, I've never connected with or felt so cared for by a physician in any field, and I'm really, really proud of that, because I think the way as physicians, we have that mandate, do no harm, but I think we kind of have more than that. Maybe it's only in physiatry, but in physical medicine, definitely in sports medicine, especially family sports, we also want people to actually thrive. We're like, we not do harm. That's kind of the bare minimum standard.
Right.
From there, we're coming to rehabilitation, get you back to form and function. And then from there, we're like, what about optimal performance? We have this sort of 3-tiered approach to care.
Yeah.
So it's really, really critical that you connect authentically with patients in a way that they know that they're seen, valued, and heard and respected. And that's when you notice all these great outcomes clinically and athletically in their sports careers and their sports journeys. And it really gives you a good sense of pride that you've done meaningful work,
Yes. Oh my gosh. And I can very much envision you being really excellent at that, in that sort of authentic enthusiasm for your patients. I mean, you've done that for me. You're like, yes, let me hype you up. At any time you are ready to be that encouraging person, and you are all about the thrive. You're like, yes, let's go. We're going to be awesome. I can't wait. So I easily see that for you. And so Yetsa, my last question, what advice do you have for other women on their career journeys?
Wonderful question. So I would say, don't underestimate the value of unstructured time to make personal connection. I think a lot of times we get very sucked into our commitment to efficiency and the sort of the transactional nature of our interactions with people, whether they're mentors or peers or mentees. And every meeting has to have an agenda and a to-do list with outcomes that include tasks. And I think the funny thing about that model is that, it doesn't necessarily lend itself to creativity and exploration of ideas during conversation. And then B, it can be a little bit like of a high pressure, sentiment. So, I really do value, and it may have to do with my upbringing, but I really do value just unstructured time, sitting around, talking with people, not necessarily about anything in particular, and seeing where it goes. There are two examples that come to mind for me. First, one of my colleagues at the University of Bath in England, she actually has built into her faculty responsibilities unstructured time to travel, to make connections with colleagues that she wants to explore future ideas with. So she'll take a week, half a week, 2 weeks, and her university will literally pay for her to go and hang out in New Haven, for example. She did that with me a couple of years ago at Yale.
That is incredible.
There was no agenda. It was literally about just organic sharing of ideas, exploring the city, getting to know one another, becoming better friends. That was it. And the best ideas emerged from that miniature sabbatical that her university sponsored.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And so that's one example that came to mind. I just thought, I'd never heard of it. And I was like, well, what is the purpose of your coming? It's this very sort of capitalistic set of questions I initially threw away. And she just threw back, there is none, and I don't have an answer to any of those. I'm coming to hang out with you. That's literally it. That's so valuable. And so that was the first moment where I just sort of took a pause and thought, this has like monetary value according to some universities. And that was the first. But then the second, a new mentee of mine, she reached out a couple of weeks ago, and she just said, "Dear Dr. Tuakli, I'm so enthusiastic about some of the topics you spoke to us about in class. Can we get together for a tea?" And I was like, "Sure. You know, what are we going to be discussing? What do you have any projects? Do you have a master's thesis? Do you know, what are we working on?" And she's like, "No, nothing to work on. I want to spend time with you." And I was, again, annoyingly, I was actually kind of taken aback. So I'm just so used to having like outcome-driven conversations.
I mean, that's the advice that we're given, right? You reach out to somebody and you say, "Can I have tea with you to discuss this?" I would love to like ask you questions about this specific topic. And, but you're right. That might get you started to build a connection with a complete rando, to go, this is the focus of conversation so that we all know what we're getting into, but then to really build a connection, to really start to have ideas, to really build a relationship. I love this idea of you have to have that unstructured free time to see where that goes.
Yeah, I think be open to that and see value in it. And as I said, don't underestimate it, but also try to carve out time for it. Just, I think personal connection, genuine, goes a hugely long way when it comes to fostering creativity, but also when it comes to just feeling fulfilled in our work relationships and in the colleagues that we exchange time and energy with. So yeah, that would be it. Don't underestimate that.
This is genius advice. And I can say personally, I have been in positions where like I get into a new job and I am like head down, ready to go. I have tasks, I have goals, like I know what we can get going, and combine that with being an introvert. So I struggle to be like, let me make close friends with all of these new people because you've just met like 100 new people at the job. And like, that just doesn't fly. Like it just doesn't work. Right. And so it has been for me figuring out what are the steps I need to take to figure out that networking, to figure out, sure, I'm an introvert and I need to give myself that like alone recover time, but this part is important.
Yeah.
And building these relationships are important so that then we can go get work done that we're all on board with, that we're all excited about, that could be even better because I've built these relationships first.
Yes, first. And I think I'm an introvert too, Giselle. I think we're both very like social introverts.
Yeah.
But I think the way to, just the part B of that advice would be, if you are an introvert, make sure that you just set boundaries around that unstructured.
Yeah.
Schedule it and make sure you don't schedule in the times when you need to rest and recover and rejuvenate. Because I'm the same way. I cannot do that all day, every day.
Yes.
I can set aside half a day twice a week.
Yes. But know that boundary. Set that in place. I love it.
Just know your energy. But I think the part C, in terms of, so obviously we talked about you don't underestimate the value of unstructured time for personal connection. B, if you're an introvert, there's a caveat. And then I think the next part is, it is part of a sustainability plan, because I think that meaningful relationships, like meaningful work, if those can be bundled, I do think it kind of is like a self-perpetuating engine that helps drive the work for a longer period of time. I think things fizzle when there's a minimal to no meaning in the connection to the work or to the person or to the people. So it's almost as though that connection has value to the work also, if that makes sense. And for sustainability.
Yeah. No, I love this. This is excellent advice. Yetsa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, for sharing your story, for this incredible advice. I'm so grateful to have had you on the show.
You are so welcome. It's been an honor and a total pleasure.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Madam Athlete Podcast. Thank you to Dr. Yetsa Tuakli-Wosornu for sharing her incredible story here. You can find out more about Yetsa in the show notes at madamathlete.com. In talking with Yetsa and some of my other recent guests, I keep coming back to the importance of figuring out your values, because values that drive us in one area of our life are often the same ones that have the potential to drive other, very different opportunities too, and make amazing and meaningful things happen. Sometimes the first step to figuring out that transfer is putting pen to paper and giving those values a name. I've put together a free guide on defining your values that you can find at madamathlete.com/values. So check it out. It's directly out of Module 1 from the Women's Career Transformation Academy. As always, thank you for being here. I appreciate you.
Women's Running Stories, where we explore the intersection between running and life. Because every woman who is committed to a running journey has a story to tell, and this is where you'll find those stories. I am host and producer Cherie Louise Turner. I'm a 53-year-old runner, and together with original music by musician and runner Cormac O'Regan, we bring these inspirational stories to life. Please join us to fuel your adventures.